Yes, ma'am, we have started streaming on live.
Shall we begin, ma'am?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Please go ahead. Say hello to him.
Good morning, sir. A warm greeting to P.K.R.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Be a reflection of what you would like to receive. If you want truth, be truthful. If you want honesty, be honest. If you want respect, then give respect. What you give out will return to you. So with this beautiful quote, let's begin today's program. A very good morning and good afternoon to one and all present here. It's my immense pleasure to welcome you for the celebration of Gandhi Jayanti on the many aspects of India. Prayer is not asking. Prayer is putting oneself in the hands of God. So now you all get ready for the prayer song. Thank you. We all blessed indeed. To welcome is to show honor. To welcome is to establish integrity. May I invite Ms. Pushpalata, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of English, to deliver the welcome address.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. On this auspicious occasion, I would like to welcome you all for the celebration of Gandhi Jayanti. Stars shine at night. Some stars shine at bright daylight. It's our pleasure to welcome one such star, Mr. Jade Adams, author and historian, London, the Honorable Chief Guest of today's function. On behalf of our management, our department, and all the faculty members, I welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much.
I extend a warm welcome to our secretary and correspondent, Mr. P.N. Venkatachalam, sir, who puts his soul and heart in uplifting others. I warmly and respectfully welcome our Chief Executive Officer, Mrs. Jagata Lakshmanan, ma'am, who proves this quote. Great leaders can see the greatness in others when they can't see it themselves and lead them to their highest potential they don't even know. Welcome you, ma'am. I extend my gracious welcome to our respected principal, Dr. D. Maithili, ma'am, who always guides us to success and motivates us in all our endeavors. Welcome you, ma'am. I heartily welcome our Vice Principal, Mrs. S.A. Dhanlakshmi, ma'am, who always has a warm smile, which is the universal language of kindness. Welcome you, ma'am. I feel happy to welcome the heads of various departments and the faculty members. Last but not the least, I welcome all the students and participants who are all gathered here. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. To accomplish great things, we must not only act, but also dream. Not only plan, but also believe. Let me invite Ms. T. Ramya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to introduce the chief guest.
Dear Chad Adams, Namaskar, welcome to India.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I respected all the dignitaries in India and students. Good morning to all. Mr. Jad, thank you so much for your acceptance to speak about Gandhi. Feeling great and cheers to give an introductory address for such a personality. Mr. Jad Adams is a writer, historian, and television producer. He masters in the art of holding a reader's interest. And he is the author of Gandhi, Naked Ambition, Women and the Vote, A World History. He has written biographies of Tony Benn, Emmeline Pankhurst, and Rudyard Kipling. He worked on the television. He worked on the television series The Dynasty, The Nehru Gandhi Story, and wrote the book which accompanied it. He is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and the research fellow at the Institute of English, School of Advanced Study, University of London. The Spectator magazine has called him an extraordinary polymath, is of course right, and currently he is committed with the book Decadent Women, Yellow Book Lives, about the women who contributed the leading 1980s journal. The book delineates Gandhi's searing ambition involving the relentless creation of an image from London dandy to naked wise man. Gandhi as a guru in the style of later popularizers of Gandhi ideas such as the Maharishi and Osho, and shows how he operated a similar control over every aspect of the lives of his followers. Mr. Jad biography has the merit of restoring Gandhi to the center of the political story while offering a full discussion of his extraordinary characteristics. So grateful, Mr. Jad. Thank you so much. And such a wonderful piece on India's national icon. If Gandhi would have been here, of course, he would say cheers with you, of course, and but as a teetotaler, at least with joy. India is awaiting to feel Gandhi by your words, Mr. Jad. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm very honored. I'll tell you how I got involved with the Gandhi story. I was invited by a publisher, asked if I would like to contribute to their biographical series. If I did so, what would I like to write about? I think you need to mute your microphone, otherwise your microphone. Otherwise, thank you. Otherwise, I think we're getting some pips. So I was invited by a publisher. Would I like to contribute to their biographical series? Who would I write about? And I unhesitatingly said it would be Gandhi, because Mohandas K. Gandhi's life is the ultimate challenge for a biographer. It was so multifaceted. There was so much surviving contemporary information. For example, Gandhi's own writings run to 100 volumes, all of which I have at least looked at. There's no biographical information for some contemporary world figures, but for Gandhi, there's a superabundance. Many people's lives yield one or two aspects of interest. Perhaps they've got an incandescent political career or a lurid personal life. Nothing else worthy of comment. In Gandhi, it's everything which is fascinating. Of course, his political life, his spiritual life, his family life, his personal life, his relationship to food. There are many things to say about Gandhi, and I'm just going to look at a small number of them today, and I'll take a chronological approach. I'm looking at him as a student, a lawyer, a civil rights leader, a family man, a cult leader, and a nationalist, and finally a nod to his death and his image. He's born in 1869 to a family of administrators of princely India. He wasn't a great student. He wasn't top of his class, but he was a diligent student, and certainly good enough for his family to be able to send him to London to study law. This, of course, was the way which the big names of the independence movement, Nehru, Jinnah, Patel, also studied law in London in the same way. His experiences in London are interesting, not because of his legal studies, but because of how he discovered India in London. It was as if he had to leave India in order to discover it. And the way this happened was because he had sworn to his mother that he would not eat meat while abroad. And consequently, he had something of a struggle to remain a vegetarian. But he discovered a vegetarian restaurant in Farringdon in London. And through that, the Vegetarian Society, which met there. And the society had a doctrine that vegetarianism was not just personal choice as to what you should eat, but a morally better way of life. And this was something which was new to Gandhi. And he said the seeds for all his future experiments with diet were laid in London. He also encountered people who respected Indian civilization and who felt that India had a great deal to give to the West, which was again something new because at that time in the Victorian period, it was felt that the Western societies with their technology were the advanced societies and everyone else was backward. Well, Gandhi encountered people in London who felt quite the opposite. That Eastern societies were in advance and had great stores, particularly of spiritual wealth. And it was in London, for example, that Gandhi first read the Bhagavad Gita, he read it in English translation, that was later to be a guide to him. He doesn't once remark that there was discrimination against him as an Indian in London. The experiences he recounts are of being invited to meetings, taken into people's homes, and more than one romantic offer, which he refused as he had been married before he left India. So now I'll speak a little of him as a lawyer. He returned to India in 1891 as a qualified barrister. He wasn't a very good lawyer. He wasn't terribly interested in points of law, which is the sort of things which move you up the scale as a lawyer. And he needed to read up on Indian law because he'd learned English law in England. On his first paid appearance at court, he was so nervous he couldn't speak, and he returned the fee to his client. He didn't therefore have any work in India, and he accepted a job in South Africa with a merchant called Dada Abdallah. And it was in South Africa that Gandhi really came into his own as a lawyer, and he realized he could do law differently. He would use his skills to unite rather than to divide the community in wasteful court cases. And he also took to taking on what were called pro bono cases. That means goodwill cases, where some injustice had been committed against people who couldn't afford a lawyer. He would do it for free. And he soon became extremely successful, the best known lawyer in South Africa, with some 12 staff under him. This is when he became a civil rights leader. There'd been wide-scale immigration from India, and the nation of South Africa was divided into two, the British and the Boer sections. They both used racial classifications of white superiority, and the Africans at the bottom, and the Indians and Chinese in the middle, a sort of middle racial strata. It was the way they conceived of things. It was here in South Africa that Gandhi first experienced extreme racial prejudice. He said his active non-violence began with his experiences of racial unfairness in South Africa. Both his own discrimination against him and the frequent insult and unjust treatment suffered by Indians. Gandhi himself was morally outraged, but he was also ashamed of his Indian companions for putting up with such treatment, and it was them that he wanted to encourage to rise up. At this stage in his life, he accepted the imperial message of Great Britain and felt discrimination and unfairness was simply not in keeping with the values of the British Empire. And if British people followed their own values, the empire would be better governed. He supported the empire, for example, in its battle against the Boers in 1899 to 1901. So he started to take on the role of a leader, urging Indians to maintain truth in business, good sanitation, and education to improve their lot, and to prove to the British that as a racial group, Indians should be treated better than Africans, if perhaps not as well as Europeans. Well, the racial views of the British might be influenced, not of the Boers. They were too deeply entrenched. Gandhi became very involved in the Indian Franchise Bill, which aimed to deprive Indians of the right to vote. And he started to widen his circle. He started dining with Muslims, Christians, and Parsis, and inviting what was then called an untouchable family to live with him and his family in South Africa. In the early years of the 20th century, Gandhi was to rouse Indian trade unions in South Africa to strike against unjust laws. And it was this action where he first conceived of mass arrest and mass imprisonment as a strategy. And he coined the term satyagraha, firmness in the truth. In his eyes, in Gandhi's eyes, I don't think it was a movement about self-determination or racial equality so much as about the truth as he saw it. In his time as a trade union leader, he led significantly, he led a huge march of 2,000 miners through South Africa. And that was one of his great achievements. And until he was the age of 50, his greatest successes had been as a labor organizer. So even when he was back in India, he led campaigns for the rights of indigo workers in Champaran and mill workers in Ahmedabad. I'll say a little about his family. He wasn't a terribly easy man to live with. He wasn't very interested in the family. He thought marriage ceremonies were wasteful. He was more concerned with humanity as a whole. He had married at the age of, he was 13, his wife Kastabai was 14. He was always to criticize child marriage, though that wasn't a particularly early marriage in society of his time. And he was to have they would have 4 surviving children between them. His family joined him, and he didn't get on tremendously well with a couple of his sons. They were angry that he didn't provide them with an education. He felt that the movement itself was sufficient education, that being engaged and spiritually engaged with society was sufficient. And he argued with his wife over the draconian food regime which he imposed on everyone, which removed salt and even spices from their diet. And his wife Kastabai was observant and was never reconciled to his disdain for the caste system. As a cult leader, he became very attractive, particularly to people who were seeking after spiritual knowledge. He attracted Europeans, for example, who respected Indian culture and wanted to follow his way of life and understand his thinking. This was a new phenomenon at this time in the early 20th century. It became fashionable in the 1960s for Westerners to seek spiritual truths in Indian culture. Gandhi was really at the start of this. He set up 4 ashrams in his life, which were dedicated to a monastic life of work, prayer, and for the later ashrams, nationalist struggle. People who lived there had to observe a very firm discipline, restricted as the amount of food they could eat, the clothes they could wear, and they had to turn up for prayers at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they had to spin yarn for an hour a day, and so on. Also, there were a lot of rules. And he expected people to observe abstinence, sexual abstinence. He observed it himself and imposed it on others. And at one time, he conducted a fast. He himself went without food as a punishment because his son had a relationship with a woman. To get on to speak of him as a nationalist, Gandhi's first experience of the Indian National Congress was to attend one of their big national meetings, and he berated the attenders for their poor sanitary practices. And he took a broom up, he himself took up a broom to sweep up the mess. And this sort of behavior didn't make him popular. He was always telling people what they should do, that they were behaving badly and they ought to behave better. That didn't always go down well, but normally he was right in doing it. He helped to recruit soldiers for the British Empire's battles in the First World War. But after the war, the British failed to recognize the sacrifice of Indians with greater political freedom. In fact, the British did the opposite. They imposed the roll-up bills, which were a restriction on civil liberties. National protests about this, excuse me. National protests about this culminated in the Amritsar massacre, of course, a terrible world event, which shocked India and also it shocked Britain, and was noted throughout the world, and really kicked off the independence struggle. Through the independence campaign, Gandhi would call strikes, but he would sometimes upset his followers by calling them off if he felt his followers weren't showing sufficient discipline. He wanted dignity and restraint in his campaigning. He promoted civil disobedience, which led to imprisonment for himself and thousands of other nationalists. The most dramatic of these was the Salt March in 1930, which was a carefully calculated provocation to the imperial authorities. Salt was taxed, though at a very low level, and the making of untaxed salt was prohibited. So Gandhi thought it would be a very good idea to point up this absurd law by making some salt. And he declared he would walk 200 miles from his ashram to the sea at Dandi, and there he'd break the law by picking up salt. Of course, announcing that he was going to commit a crime at some time in the future gave plenty of time for newspapers and the newsreel cameras to observe the build-up of this act, which was then repeated along the Indian shoreline. It was a spectacular success, and it became known throughout the world. In the United States, for example, Time magazine made Gandhi the Man of the Year. By the end of that year, 1930, 100,000 nationalists had been arrested, and soon talks started in London with the British authorities. Gandhi had his own idea of what independence would mean. In his manifesto, Hind Swaraj, he looked towards the withering away of material life. He thought factories, air transport, law courts, industrial machinery, and so on would wither away as India's population refined its moral integrity, free of British rule. So he envisaged a return to conditions before the advent of big cities and the coming of the railways. He looked to a village India, like the India of Ramayana. Critics, his own supporters, considered it a fantasy of nostalgia that before the British came, India was self-sufficient in this way. If a myth, however, it was one with some potency. I'll talk a little about Gandhi's image. He considered both self-reliance and self-respect to be lacking in colonial India, but both of these deficiencies he felt could be remedied. To this end, he supported the Swadeshi movement, which aimed at boycotting foreign goods and using Indian goods. Nationalists wanted to reduce the use of foreign imports. So, and it became a matter of honor not to use foreign cloth. Gandhi took this one further and encouraged the burning of foreign cloth and vigorously promoted this. Swadeshi had been in existence since the beginning of the century, but Gandhi really turbocharged it. He ordered a bonfire of foreign cloth at Parel in Mumbai. And members of the public pledged to burn some 150,000 of the finest saris, shirts and jackets, and this example was followed all over India. Cloth for everyday use now was to be homespun or khadi, which became the nationalist uniform, and Gandhi called the khadi wearers freedom fighters. He wore it himself and began to promote hand spinning as not only economically desirable, but as spiritually necessary. He began to devote an hour a day to spinning on a wheel and expected everyone else to do so as well. The next stage in Gandhi's progression with the Swadeshi movement, when he was 51, was that he decided to take it even further in personal terms. And in September 1921, he went clad only in a loincloth to a meeting of weavers. He represented this as an act of solidarity with the poor who couldn't afford enough khadi to replace the foreign cloth that he was insisting they burn. So in future, Gandhi would be bare-chested with naked legs covered only with a loincloth, sometimes with a shawl. Spiritual or not, this image did him no harm at all. His enemies fumed at the very image of him. Excuse me. Churchill said, when Gandhi had an interview with the Viceroy of India, that this seditious lawyer was now posing as a fakir of a type well known in the East, striding half naked up the steps of the Viceregal Palace. And you can imagine how angry, how outraged some of the old English old guard were to see this sort of image. This Gandhi brand of ascetic living and defiant speech, laced with a hint of mischief, because he was always rather fun, this was summed up in the image of Gandhi, the loinclothed sage. For every newspaper reader, political cartoons made him an identifiable figure. He stole the show always in cinema newsreels. He became one of the most easily recognizable men in the world and easily the most famous Indian in the world. So finally to partition and his death. By 1942, even Churchill had accepted that there would be independence, and the battle became much more confused. It was no longer whether India would be independent, but what type of independence it should be. The position of the princely states. Should India have dominion status under the British Crown or be entirely independent? How to ensure fairness between the different communities? Should it be a United States of India with a weak central control, or should it be partition along religious lines? Gandhi, with his spirituality and his high appeals to morality and with his grand gestures, was just not the right man for these political discussions. And his erstwhile comrades in the Congress sidelined him. And he went through the partition period, trying to bring peace, trying to calm the situation down. He was finally assassinated at the age of 78 in Birla House in Delhi, shot by a former supporter, nationalist called Gandhi, who felt that Gandhi's peaceful message and willingness to compromise with Muslims had damaged India. His death discredited these hardliners like Gandhi and strengthened those who supported the idea of a secular India, which was open to everyone, because that was certainly Gandhi's message, that India was there for all. To sum up, and finally, Gandhi had turned the nationalist cause from a passion of the elite, the lawyers, the merchants, and the civil servants, to one of the people, of the masses of India. His real achievement was in getting everyone in India to feel that independence was their birthright and that dignity was their birthright. And he became one of the few Indians of whom everyone has heard, and most certainly the most famous of the last 1,000 years. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about him. It's been very enjoyable.
No one was great.
Thank you, sir. 1 minute. Thank you, sir. It was wonderful. We were very happy to listen to you about Gandhi because we may know the history little bit, but from you, it was a wonderful listening opportunity, and you have touched everything: his life as a historian, as a politician, as an economist, as a spiritual leader, as a national leader, and what he did as a student in London, and what he did in South Africa, and what he was doing in India as a freedom fighter, what he did. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your remarks, madam. Thank you.
Of the college. I'm so happy to listen to you. Really lovely lecture on Gandhi. Thank you once again. Namaste.
Thank you, madam, for your valuable thoughts. No one was great without a touch of inspiration. You are an inspiration to all of us. It was indeed a great presentation. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable thoughts. And you just encourage us your words of wisdom and dedicating your valuable time for us. Thank you. Now, this forum is open for questions.
Chad, I'm very happy to have your articulation. Is there any personal attraction towards Gandhi to write on him?
I'm interested in things that I don't understand. And so I wanted to write about Gandhi because I couldn't conceive of the extent of his life. It was not, as I said, I think in my introduction, it wasn't just here's a politician with some interesting small aspects of his life and then some challenges and he overcomes them and then is assassinated. It wasn't that. It was the deep spiritual life, his constant his constant urge to know more spiritually, but also merely facts. I mean, at the time that he was assassinated, even then, he was still learning. He still felt, I've got to know more. I've got to know more. So he had a Bengali primer because he was studying the Bengali language so that he could better communicate with people. He was 78 years old. Anyone would have been happy to be his translator. He didn't need to, he didn't need to do it himself, but he wanted to do it himself. He wanted to learn, and it's that kind of attitude and the strength of his will I found very impressive. That whatever people said about him, and I tried to bring out in my talk that he did not always please the other nationalist leaders, so that they very often turned against him, and later on realized his value to the cause.
Mr. Jad, actually, I have read your book. The book, I mean, in India, this book is called the Book of Criticism. The tons of criticism have made on Gandhi's life. Actually, as a writer, you have received a lot more criticism from every corner of the world. Moreover, it's nothing. I read the book. You have, I mean, the personal side is nothing. If you go on with the autobiography, you have to actually you have to cover every inch of a person. So nothing wrong with what you have dealt with the naked ambition. But how could you overcome from the criticism? Because it's nothing. A man behind Gandhi. That is what the thing we have to think over. What's up?
Well, whenever someone has a biography about them, there is always there are always people who say, no, that's not the person I knew, or that's not the person I've read about in the other biographies. If you say anything original, then there's always some level of criticism. I actually felt the book was pretty well received, and I was happy about the things that people said about Naked Ambition, and I don't think that that any of the criticism was really very strong, that people were saying, oh, you shouldn't talk about these things, you shouldn't talk about Gandhi's personal life. But when I almost everything that I relied upon came from Gandhi's own writings, and he himself wrote about these brahmacharya experiments with chastity, which is something that I've been criticized for writing about. Gandhi himself wrote about them, and he talked about them with his friends and other people in the ashram. So if I write about them myself, then I am only doing what he asked me to do. You're muted. You're muted, Ramya.
Sorry. Okay. Actually, Mr. Jad, as Kuswan Singh told, you have masters in the art of holding the readers. Of course, it's very appropriate towards you. The title itself make more and more attraction, but nothing is there. Then, that is the complete truth. But even in the title itself, you have attracted the world towards your writing piece. I'm much impressed. Really, so nice.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, sir. Thanks for increasing our knowledge. Feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. So now, I would like to call upon Dr. Abhiraya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to propose the vote of thanks.
Right, left.
Good afternoon to all. I deem it's a great honor and privilege to propose vote of thanks on this special occasion. My heart filled with lots of gratitude and respect for our distinguished special guest, Mr. Jared Adams, for not only sparing his valuable time for us to grace this occasion, but also for enlightening us with his valuable speech. Thank you so much, sir. We are so grateful to our secretary, Mr. P.N. Venkatachalam, for his kindness, hospitality, and constant support. Thank you, sir. I extend my gratitude to our CEO, Professor Jagatha Lakshmanan, for her encouragement and guidance. Thank you so much, ma'am. I thank our well-wishers, Principal Dr. D. Maithili, and Vice Principal S.A. Dhanalakshmi for their unstinted support and guidance. My heartfelt thanks to my colleagues who worked hard to ensure that this occasion becomes a memorable success. I thank all the distinguished invitees and faculties of various departments for their presence. Last but not least, I thank our students who provide us with valuable support in enriching this celebration. Finally, I leave you with a quote of Mahatma Gandhi: be the change you want to see in this world. Once again, I thank you all. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, ma. Thank you for organizing such a wonderful program. Ramya, Department of English, and other staff who have helped you to organize this function. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Mr.
Thank you.
Jad,
Thank you.
yes, Mr. Jad, we are awaiting to bring you in person. I welcome you to India.
Thank you very much. It's so good to have met you all, if only virtually.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Jana Gana Mana Adhinayaka Jaya Hai Bharat Bhagya Vidhana
Thank you all for being with us. Now, the program is officially closed.